The morning sun had barely crept over the jagged peaks of the Superstition Mountains when Clara Whitmore heard the thunder of hooves. She'd been drawing water from the well behind her small adobe house, her calloused hands gripping the rope as she hauled up the wooden bucket. The rumbling grew louder, accompanied by war cries that sent ice through her veins. Clara dropped the bucket, hearing it crash somewhere far below. She ran toward the house, her worn boots catching on the hem of her black morning dress. 6 months had passed since cholera took her husband Samuel, leaving her alone on this patch of scrubland at the edge of Mercy's Bend. The nearest neighbor lived 3 miles away, and the town itself was a half-day's ride. She'd almost reached the door when the first rider crested the hill, an Apache warrior, his face painted in red and white stripes, his long black hair streaming behind him like a war banner. More followed. 5, 10, 15 riders spreading out to encircle her property. Clara's hand found the door latch just as an arrow thudded into the wood beside her head. She stumbled inside, slamming the door and reaching for Samuel's old Spencer rifle above the fireplace. Her fingers trembled as she fumbled with the ammunition. Through the small window, she watched the riders dismount with practiced ease. They moved like shadows despite the growing daylight, surrounding her home with terrifying efficiency. The door exploded inward with a single kick. Clara managed one shot before strong hands wrenched the rifle away. She fought with the desperation of a cornered animal, scratching and clawing, but there were too many. Rough hands bound her wrists with rawhide strips that bit into her skin. A warrior with a scar running from his left eye to his jaw threw her over his shoulder like a sack of grain. They tied her to a spare horse, her hands bound to the saddle horn. As they rode away, Clara watched smoke begin to rise from her home. Everything she'd built with Samuel, every memory contained within those walls, consumed by flames. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with the dust kicked up by the horses. The journey became a blur of pain and terror. The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly, turning the desert into a furnace. Red rocks and towering saguaro cacti passed in an endless procession. Her throat burned with thirst, her lips cracking in the dry heat. When she swayed in the saddle, nearly fainting, one of the warriors gave her water from a leather pouch, just enough to keep her alive. They rode for what felt like days but was probably hours, following paths invisible to Clara's eyes. The landscape grew more desolate, more foreign. Massive buttes rose like ancient sentinels, their stratified layers telling stories of epics she couldn't fathom. The horses picked their way through narrow canyons where the walls seemed to press in from both sides. By late afternoon, they arrived at the Apache camp. It was larger than Clara had expected. Dozens of wickiups arranged in rough circles, smoke rising from cook fires, children playing between the dwellings. Women looked up from their work, their dark eyes following the riders with interest. Some whispered to each other, pointing at Clara. The warriors dismounted, and Clara was hauled down from her horse, her legs, numb from hours in the saddle, buckled beneath her. She fell to her knees in the dust, earning laughter from some of the younger warriors. The scar-faced one who'd captured her grabbed her arm, pulling her upright and dragging her toward the center of the camp. An elderly man emerged from one of the larger wickiups. His hair was white as desert bones, his face deeply lined, but his bearing still proud and strong. The chief, Clara realized. The warriors spoke rapidly in Apache, gesturing toward her. She caught her name being attempted in their language, twisted into unfamiliar syllables. The chief studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes unreadable. Then he spoke, his voice carrying the authority of command. The scarred warrior's face darkened with anger, but he nodded curtly. The chief called out again, and Clara heard a name, Taza. A figure emerged from the shadows between 2 wickiups. He was younger than most of the warriors, perhaps 25 summers, but something in his bearing made the others step aside. Where the other warriors wore expressions of triumph or cruelty, his face was carved from stone, his eyes, black as obsidian, held no emotion whatsoever. He was tall for an Apache, lean but powerful, with a kind of strength that came from survival rather than mere training. Scars marked his chest and arms, not the decorative scarification some warriors bore, but the ragged remnants of violence. His hair fell past his shoulders, adorned with a single eagle feather. The chief spoke at length, gesturing between Clara and the young warrior. Taza's expression never changed, but Clara saw his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. When the chief finished, Taza nodded once and approached her. Clara shrank back, but there was nowhere to go. The other warriors formed a loose circle, some grinning with anticipation. Taza reached out and grasped the rawhide binding her wrists. With one swift motion, he cut through it with a knife that appeared and disappeared so quickly Clara barely saw it. He spoke a single word in English. "Come." Clara had no choice but to follow. The crowd parted before them, and she felt the weight of dozens of eyes tracking their movement. Women pulled their children closer, as if Clara's white skin might be contagious. Young warriors spat in the dust as she passed. Taza led her to a wickiup set slightly apart from the others. He pulled aside the hide covering the entrance and gestured for her to enter. Clara hesitated, her heart hammering against her ribs. Stories filled her mind, terrible stories told in hushed voices by the good wives of Mercy's Bend. Stories of what Apache warriors did to white women. "Now," Taza said, his English heavily accented but clear. Clara ducked through the entrance. The interior was dim and smoky, but surprisingly clean. Buffalo robes covered the ground, and various implements hung from the wooden framework. A small fire pit occupied the center, cold now in the day's heat. Taza entered behind her, and suddenly the space felt impossibly small. He moved to the far side of the wickiup and sat cross-legged on a buffalo robe. For a long moment, he simply watched her, his face unreadable in the dim light. Clara stood frozen near the entrance, every muscle tensed to run, though she knew it would be futile. Her dress was torn and filthy, her hair hanging in dusty tangles around her face. She could smell her own fear sweat, sharp and animal. "Sit," Taza said finally. Clara's legs gave out more than obeyed. She collapsed onto a robe as far from him as the small space allowed. They regarded each other across the fire pit like two predators forced to share territory. The silence stretched on, broken only by the distant sounds of the camp, children laughing, dogs barking, the rhythmic thump of women grinding corn. Normal sounds that seemed surreal given Clara's circumstances. As darkness began to fall, women brought food, a kind of stew that smelled of sage and meat Clara didn't want to identify. Taza ate mechanically, never taking his eyes off her. Clara's stomach churned with hunger, but fear kept her from touching the wooden bowl placed before her. Night came quickly in the desert. The temperature plummeted, and Clara shivered in her thin dress. Taza rose and added wood to the fire pit, coaxing flames to life with practiced ease. The flickering light threw dancing shadows on the wickiup walls. This was it, Clara thought. This was when he would take what the chief had given him. She pressed herself against the wickiup wall, trying to become invisible, trying to disappear into the buffalo robes beneath her. Taza settled back onto his robe. He watched the fire for a moment, then looked at her. In the firelight, she could see his eyes weren't truly black but a very dark brown, like coffee grounds or rich earth. "You fear," he said. It wasn't a question. Clara nodded, unable to trust her voice. Taza was quiet for a long moment. Then, so softly she almost didn't hear it over the crackling fire, he said, "I'll be gentle." The words hung in the air between them. Clara searched his face for deception, for the cruel joke, but found only that same carved stillness. He pulled a second buffalo robe over himself and lay down, turning his back to her. "Sleep," he said. "Tomorrow is another day." Clara remained frozen against the wall, waiting. But Taza's breathing gradually deepened and slowed. He was asleep, or pretending to be. The fire burned lower, casting fewer shadows, and still he didn't move. Exhaustion finally overcame terror. Clara pulled a robe over herself, keeping her back to the wall and her eyes on the warrior's still form. She didn't expect to sleep, but her body had other ideas. As the fire died to embers and the camp settled into nighttime quiet, Clara's eyes closed despite her best efforts. Her last thought before sleep took her was confusion. Why would a savage— No, she corrected herself, remembering the intelligence in those dark eyes. Why would this man show mercy? What game was he playing? In the darkness of the wickiup, with the unfamiliar sounds of the Apache camp surrounding her, Clara Whitmore slept and dreamed of smoke rising from a burning home, of Samuel's grave she'd never visit again, and of obsidian eyes that held secrets deeper than the desert canyons. Clara woke to unfamiliar sounds, the soft scrape of hide against wood, voices speaking in the flowing Apache tongue, the cry of an eagle somewhere high above. For a moment, disorientation gripped her. Then memory crashed back, and with it, fear. Taza was gone. Sunlight filtered through the wickiup smoke hole, telling her she'd slept far later than her usual farm wife habits allowed. Her body ached from the hard ride and harder ground. Despite the buffalo robes, she peered outside cautiously. The camp bustled with morning activity. Women tended fires and prepared food, while children ran between the wickiups, their laughter sharp and bright. Warriors checked weapons or worked on arrows, their movements efficient and practiced. And everyone, it seemed, was watching her. A woman approached, elderly but straight-backed, her gray hair twisted into an elaborate knot. She thrust a water gourd at Clara, speaking rapidly in Apache. When Clara didn't respond, the woman's expression soured. She gestured impatiently at Clara's torn, filthy dress. Then at a bundle she carried. Clara understood. She was to change clothes. The woman watched with hawk eyes as Clara struggled into the unfamiliar garments, a deerskin skirt and loose blouse decorated with beadwork. The clothing felt strange against her skin, too soft where her cotton dress had been stiff, too free where stays had once confined. The old woman grunted approval and gestured for Clara to follow. Outside, the stares intensified. Children pointed and whispered. Women paused in their work to watch her pass. Some of the younger warriors made comments that, while Clara couldn't understand the words, needed no translation. Their laughter followed her like mockery. The woman led her to where several younger women sat grinding corn on stone metates. She pointed at Clara, then at an empty grinding stone, her meaning clear. Clara was to work. She'd ground corn before, back on the farm, but never quite like this. The women worked in rhythm, their movements synchronized like a dance Clara couldn't follow. Her hands, soft from months of widowhood's relative ease, quickly blistered against the stone. When she spilled corn, scattering precious kernels in the dust, one woman spat at her feet. Only a young girl showed any kindness. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, with enormous dark eyes and a twisted foot that made her limp. When the other women turned away, the girl demonstrated the proper grinding motion, her small hands patient and sure. Clara tried to smile her thanks, but the girl didn't smile back. She simply watched with those large, solemn eyes. Later, Clara learned the girl was called Little Bird, though she never spoke. Some said she'd been born mute. Others whispered that she'd stopped talking the day soldiers attacked their previous camp. Clara noticed how the other children avoided her, how even some adults seemed uncomfortable with her silence. The day passed in a blur of unfamiliar tasks and hostile faces. Clara's attempts to help with various chores were met with suspicion or outright rejection. When she approached the cook fires, women blocked her way. When she tried to carry water, young boys tripped her, sending her sprawling and the precious liquid soaking into the thirsty earth. Taza remained absent throughout the day. Clara caught glimpses of him, conferring with other warriors, working on weapons, riding out with a hunting party. He never looked her way, as if she'd ceased to exist the moment he'd left the wickiup that morning. As afternoon heat gave way to evening cool, Clara found herself alone near the edge of camp. Her hands were raw and bleeding. Her back ached, and her soul felt as parched as the desert surrounding them. She'd never felt so isolated, Not even in those first dark days after Samuel's death. White woman should not wander. Clara spun around. A warrior stood behind her, not Taza, but the scarred one who'd captured her. His English was rougher than Taza's, his smile cruel. "I wasn't," Clara began. "Many here want you dead," he continued, moving closer. "Say Taza is fool. Say white woman brings bad spirits." He reached out and fingered a strand of her hair, now dusty and tangled. Maybe they right. Clara jerked away, heart hammering. The warrior laughed and said something in Apache that made other nearby warriors chuckle. He moved closer still, backing her against a large boulder. "Where is your protector now?" he asked. "Where is—" A hand fell on the warrior's shoulder. Taza stood there, having appeared as silently as a ghost. He spoke quietly in Apache, but Clara heard steel beneath the soft words. The scarred warrior's face darkened. For a moment, violence crackled in the air between them like lightning before a storm. Then the scarred one stepped back, spitting in the dust at Clara's feet before stalking away. Taza watched him go, then turned to Clara. "Come," he said simply. She followed him back to the wickiup, aware of the eyes tracking their movement, the whispers that followed in their wake. Inside, Taza gestured to her bleeding hands. "Show me," he said. Clara extended her hands reluctantly. Taza examined the blisters and cuts with surprising gentleness. He retrieved a small parfleche bag and removed some kind of salve that smelled of sage and something bitter when he began applying it to her wounds. Clara flinched, but the sting quickly gave way to cooling relief. "You work too hard," he said without looking up. "Trying to prove worth." "I have to do something," Clara said. "They all hate me." "Hate?" Taza considered this. "No. Fear. Maybe anger. Your enemy in their eyes. But not in yours." He finished with her hands and sat back. "I have seen enough enemies," he said quietly. "I know what they look like." That night, as they ate in silence, Clara managing to swallow some of the stew despite her churning stomach, the wind began to pick up outside. It whistled through the camp, rattling the wickiups and sending dust devils spinning between the structures. "Storm coming," Taza said, reading the signs. "Desert storm. Very bad." Within an hour, his prediction proved true. The wind became a howling monster, driving sand and grit with stinging force. The wickiup swayed alarmingly, its hide covering snapping like a sail. Clara huddled in her buffalo robe, certain the entire structure would be torn away. A terrible ripping sound confirmed her fears. The covering on one side of the wickiup tore free, exposing them to the full fury of the storm. Sand poured in, choking and blinding. Clara screamed, though the sound was swallowed by the wind's roar. Taza grabbed her arm. "We go!" he shouted over the storm. "Now!" He pulled her outside into the maelstrom. Clara couldn't see more than a few feet. Sand filled her nose and mouth, scouring exposed skin. Taza navigated by instinct or memory, pulling her along until they reached a small cave in the rocky outcropping at the camp's edge. They stumbled inside, gasping and spitting sand. The cave was shallow, barely more than an overhang, but it provided shelter from the wind's worst fury. Other refugees from the storm had the same idea. Clara could make out shapes in the darkness, hear coughing and children crying. Taza guided her to a corner away from the others. He pulled her down beside him and wrapped his blanket around them both, creating a small pocket of warmth in the cold desert night. Clara found herself pressed against his side, sharing heat, sharing breath. The storm raged on. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes. Time lost meaning in the darkness and noise. Clara shivered uncontrollably, her desert clothing inadequate against the temperature drop. Taza pulled her closer, and she didn't resist. Survival trumped propriety. At some point, exhaustion overtook discomfort. Clara dozed fitfully, waking periodically to the storm's fury and the strange reality of sheltering in a warrior's arms. During one such waking, she felt Taza's hand on her back and realized he was examining old scars through the thin fabric of her blouse. She stiffened, but his touch remained gentle, exploring. Samuel had put those marks there during one of his whiskey rages, before the sickness took him and transformed him into the dying man who'd begged her forgiveness. She'd never shown them to anyone. "Who did this?" Taza asked quietly. "It doesn't matter," Clara whispered. "He's dead now." "Your husband?" She nodded against his shoulder. "White men," Taza said, and there was something in his voice, not judgment exactly, but a kind of grim understanding. "They speak of Apache cruelty, but this," his fingers traced one particularly deep scar, "this is also cruel." Clara felt tears coming and couldn't stop them. They came in great, shuddering sobs that shook her entire body. She cried for Samuel, both the man who'd hurt her and the one who'd died repentant. She cried for her burned home, her lost life, her current captivity. She cried from fear and exhaustion and the strange comfort of being held by someone who was supposed to be her enemy. Taza said nothing. He simply held her, one arm around her shoulders, solid and warm against the storm. His own body carried its share of scars. She could feel them through his shirt. Ridged lines that spoke of violence survived. When her sobs finally subsided, he spoke again. "In this place," he said slowly, searching for English words. "I promise. No one touches you. No one hurts you. This I swear." "Why?" Clara asked. "Why do you care?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Maybe because I know what it is to lose everything, to have only pain left. Maybe because—" He paused. "Maybe because you look at me and see a man. Not just Apache. First time in long time someone sees this." The storm began to weaken as dawn approached. Other refugees started leaving the cave, returning to assess damage in the growing light. But Taza and Clara remained, wrapped in their shared blanket, neither ready to break the strange intimacy born of necessity and storm. When they finally emerged, the camp was in chaos. Several wiki-ups had been destroyed, supplies scattered, but the Apache were already working to repair damage, their resilience evident in every efficient movement. Taza's wiki-up was among the damaged, but salvageable. As they worked together to repair it, Clara holding supports while Taza lashed them in place, she caught Little Bird watching them. The mute girl's expression was unreadable, but when Clara smiled tentatively, Little Bird almost smiled back. That night, in their repaired shelter, something had changed. The space between them seemed smaller, the silence less hostile. When Taza gave her an extra blanket against the cold, their hands touched briefly. Neither pulled away immediately. "Tomorrow," Taza said as they settled for sleep, "I teach you to weave baskets. Is good work. Women will respect skill." It wasn't much, just a small offer of help. But lying in the darkness, listening to the normal night sounds of the camp, Clara felt something she hadn't experienced since her capture, a tiny flame of hope. She was still a captive, still hated and feared by most, but she was also, perhaps, not entirely alone. And in this harsh land where survival itself was a daily battle, not being alone might be enough. For now, the scream pierced the morning air like an arrow. Clara dropped the basket she'd been weaving. Taza had kept his promise to teach her and ran toward the sound. A crowd had gathered near the camp's edge, their voices rising in alarm. Little Bird lay on the ground, her small body rigid with pain. 2 puncture marks on her ankle told the story. Rattlesnake. The child's face had already taken on a grayish pallor, her breathing shallow and rapid. The Apache women circled helplessly. Their medicine man had ridden out days ago to another band's camp. Some women began death chants, believing the child lost. Little Bird's mother, Clara, had learned she was called Pale Moon, keened with grief. Rocking back and forth, Clara pushed through the crowd. "Move aside," she commanded, surprising herself with the authority in her voice. "I can help her." The women looked at her with suspicion and disbelief. Scar-faced warrior, she'd learned his name was Black Crow, sneered. "White woman's medicine is weak. The child will die." "She'll die if we do nothing," Clara shot back. She knelt beside Little Bird, her mind racing. Samuel's mother had been a midwife and healer back in Missouri. She'd taught Clara about snake bites, made her memorize the treatments. "I need a sharp knife." Clara said, "And whiskey, mezcal, whatever strong drink you have. Now! Her urgency transcended language barriers. Someone thrust a knife into her hand. A bottle of the Apache's potent tiswin appeared. Clara didn't hesitate. She cut an X over each puncture mark, then put her mouth to the wound and sucked hard, spitting out blood and venom. The crowd gasped at this shocking act. She repeated the process several times, then poured tiswin over the wounds. Little Bird whimpered. A good sign. She was still responsive. Clara tore strips from her own blouse, binding the ankle tightly but not enough to cut off circulation. She needs water, Clara said. Small sips, and keep her still. No movement to spread the poison. For hours, Clara tended the child. She bathed Little Bird's fevered face, forced water between her lips, and watched for the dreaded signs of venom spreading. The crowd gradually dispersed, but Pale Moon remained, her eyes never leaving Clara's face. Taza appeared at some point, standing silently at the edge of the scene. He spoke quietly with others, and Clara caught her name mentioned repeatedly. She ignored the talk, focused entirely on the small life struggling beneath her hands. By sunset, the crisis had passed. Little Bird's color improved. Her breathing steadied. When she finally opened her eyes and reached for her mother, Pale Moon wept with joy. She grasped Clara's hands, speaking rapid Apache that needed no translation, gratitude pouring out in any language. That evening, the entire camp's attitude shifted. Women who'd spurned Clara now brought her food. Warriors nodded respectfully as she passed. Even Black Crow, though still hostile, no longer spat at her feet. You did dangerous thing, Taza said that night in their wiki-up. Putting mouth to snakebite. Could have killed you. She would have died. Clara replied simply, I couldn't watch a child die when I could help. Taza studied her in the firelight. You have courage, like Apache woman. It was the highest compliment he could give, and Clara felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. Days passed more easily after that. Clara found her place in the camp's daily rhythm. She helped gather plants for food and medicine, learning from the women who now accepted her presence. Her basket weaving improved under patient tutelage. Little Bird became her constant shadow, the mute girl following Clara everywhere with devoted eyes. One morning, restlessness seized her. The camp felt confining. The mountains called to her, while others rested during the afternoon heat. Clara slipped away. She'd seen a stream glinting in a nearby canyon and longed for solitude and clean water. The stream was everything she'd hoped, clear and cool, shaded by cottonwoods. Clara knelt and drank deeply, then splashed her face and arms. For a moment, she felt almost free. The growl made her blood freeze. A wolf emerged from the brush across the stream. No, not just a wolf. A massive gray beast, ribs showing through matted fur, foam at its mouth. Rabid, the worst kind of dangerous. Clara backed away slowly, but the wolf advanced, splashing through the shallow water. Its yellow eyes held madness. She reached for a rock, knowing it wouldn't be enough. The wolf gathered itself to spring. The arrow took it through the throat. The wolf collapsed mid-leap, thrashing in the water before going still. Clara spun to see Taza lowering his bow, his face thunderous. Foolish woman! He grabbed her shoulders and, shaking her slightly, You could have died. Why you leave camp? I just wanted... Clara began. Wanted what? To escape? To die? His grip tightened. You think you prisoner? You think I keep you chained? Something snapped in Clara. All the fear, frustration, and confusion of the past weeks erupted. Yes, I'm a prisoner. You took me from my home, brought me here where everyone hates me. I'd rather face that wolf than spend another day being stared at like an animal. You know nothing. Taza's own control shattered. You think Apache choose this life, hide in mountains, run from soldiers. You lose husband, I lose mother, sister, everyone. Soldiers come to our winter camp. We sleeping, they kill all, women, children, babies. My mother begged for my sister's life. Soldier laugh and... He made a slashing motion across his throat. I am 16 winters. I watch all this. Cannot stop it. The pain in his voice cut through Clara's anger. She saw him truly then, not just the stoic warrior, But the boy who'd witnessed unspeakable horror, they cut off heads. Taza continued more quietly. Take his trophies. Leave bodies for coyotes. This is your civilized people. This is why Apache fight. Why we take you for trade, for bargaining, but I... He released her shoulders, turning away. I cannot look at you and see enemy. I am weak. You're not weak, Clara said softly. You're human. That night, Taza presented her with something wrapped in deerskin. Clara unfolded it to find a beautiful dress, soft doeskin decorated with elaborate beadwork, finer than anything the other women wore. Was my mother's, Taza said quietly. For special ceremonies. I save it, though I don't know why. Maybe for... He stopped. You wear for moon ceremony tonight. The full moon ceremony was sacred to the Apache. Clara had learned that Taza would include her. Let her wear his mother's dress meant more than any words could convey. She fingered the beautiful beadwork, tears pricking her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. The ceremony took place in the center of camp. Drums beat hypnotically while men sang and women danced in circles around the great fire. Clara stood with the other women, wearing the precious dress that drew many stares and whispers. When the women's dance began, Pale Moon took Clara's hand, pulling her into the circle. Clara tried to follow the steps, stumbling at first but gradually finding the rhythm. The women encouraged her with smiles and gestures, adjusting her movements until she moved in harmony with them. Round and round they danced, and Clara felt something shift inside her. The firelight, the drums, the star-filled sky. It all blended into something larger than herself. For the first time since her capture, she didn't feel like an outsider. She was simply one more woman dancing under the eternal moon. She caught sight of Taza watching from among the men. The firelight flickered across his face, and in his eyes she saw something that made her stumble. Not possession, not mere desire, but wonder, as if he were seeing moonlight for the first time. After the ceremony, they walked together to the stream where they'd argued hours before. The wolf's body was gone, dragged away by scavengers. They sat on a flat rock, shoulders touching, watching moonlight dance on water. Your mother's dress is beautiful, Clara said. I was honored to wear it. She would have liked you. Taza replied. She always said strongest warriors are women. They fight different battles, but harder ones. Tell me about her. So he did. Under the desert moon, Taza shared memories, his mother's laughter, her skilled hands creating beauty from simple materials, her fierce love for her children. He spoke of his sister, only 12 when she died, who loved to sing and could gentle the wildest horse. Sometimes I hear them, he admitted, in wind, in water. They tell me to let go of hate, but hate kept me alive. Until what? He turned to face her. Until you make me remember there is more than revenge, more than war. Clara reached out, touching one of the scars on his arm. These don't define you, she said. No more than mine define me. Taza caught her hand, holding it against his chest where his heart beat strong and steady. Clara, he said, and it was the first time he'd spoken her name properly. Not white woman or you, but her name, soft and careful on his lips. The space between them disappeared, under the watching moon. Beside the singing water, two broken people found in each other something they'd thought lost forever, the possibility of healing, the promise of hope, the first stirring of a love that should have been impossible but felt as inevitable as sunrise. When they finally returned to camp, walking with carefully maintained distance but aware of every movement the other made, the knowing looks of the women followed them, but for once, Clara didn't mind. She was beginning to understand that she wasn't a prisoner anymore, perhaps hadn't been for some time, what she was becoming instead. She wasn't ready to name. But as she lay in the wickiup that night, listening to Taza's breathing and remembering the feel of his heartbeat under her hand, she thought perhaps being captured had been the beginning of being set free. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, the threat of soldiers, the disapproval of those who still saw her as an outsider. The vast gulf between their two worlds, all of it waited beyond tonight. But tonight, she danced under the moon in a sacred dress, saved a child's life, and discovered that home might not be a place but a person. It was enough. For now, it was everything. The stream glittered like scattered diamonds under the moon. Clara had come here after the ceremony, drawn by an inexplicable pull. The dress, Taza's mother's dress, whispered against her skin with each movement, making her feel both honored and strangely vulnerable. She heard him before she saw him. Taza moved quietly, but she'd learned to sense his presence over these weeks. He emerged from the shadows, still wearing his ceremonial paint, the white stripes across his chest seeming to glow in the moonlight. "You should not walk alone," he said, though his tone held no reproach. "I'm not alone now," Clara replied. They stood at the water's edge, the space between them charged with unspoken words. Since that night in the storm cave, since her saving Little Bird, since his sharing his mother's dress, each moment had been a thread weaving them closer. And now those threads felt ready to either bind them together or snap under the strain. "You danced well tonight," Taza said, "like you belonged." "Did I?" Clara touched the beadwork on the dress. "Sometimes I don't know where I belong anymore." "Perhaps belonging is not about place," he said, moving closer. "Perhaps it is about people." Clara's heart quickened. The moonlight caught the angles of his face, transforming the stern warrior into something younger, more vulnerable. She saw not the man who'd kept her captive, but the boy who'd lost everything, who'd shared his pain and his mother's memory. "Taza," she began, but he raised a hand. "I must speak," he said. "These words burn in me like fire. You came as enemy, but now—" He struggled, his English failing him. He switched to Apache, the words flowing like water, then caught himself. "I forget you don't understand." "Then show me," Clara whispered. The invitation hung between them like morning mist. Taza reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. His fingers traced the line of her jaw, rough calluses gentle against her skin. Clara leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed. The kiss was inevitable as sunrise, soft as desert rain. Clara had been kissed before. Samuel's whiskey-flavored demands, rough and taking. This was different. Taza's lips moved against hers with a tenderness that made her ache, a careful exploration that asked permission with each heartbeat. She answered by winding her arms around his neck, pulling him closer. The ceremony paint smeared between them as the kiss deepened, grew hungry. Months of loneliness, years of emptiness, a lifetime of not knowing this was possible. It all crystallized into this moment beside the singing water. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Taza rested his forehead against hers. "Clara," he said, her name a prayer on his lips. "My heart sees you." It was the Apache way of declaring love. She'd learned. Simple, direct, honest. Clara's throat tightened with emotion. "My heart sees you too," she whispered back. What followed was as natural as breathing. Taza spread his blanket on the soft sand near the stream. The moonlight turned everything silver. The water, the rocks, their skin as clothing fell away. There was no shame, no hesitation, just two souls recognizing their match in the other. He was gentle, as he'd promised that first night. His hands worshipped her body, erasing the memory of rougher touches, replacing pain with reverence. Clara discovered desire she'd thought dead with Samuel, passion that had nothing to do with duty and everything to do with choice. They moved together in ancient rhythm, the sound of the stream mixing with their breathless whispers. Taza spoke to her in Apache, words she didn't understand but felt in her bones. She answered with his name, over and over, until the stars above them blurred and the world contracted to just this, skin and breath and the perfect unity of two becoming one. Afterward, they lay entwined on the blanket, Clara's head on Taza's chest, listening to his heartbeat slow. He played with her hair, now loose and wild around her shoulders. Neither spoke. Words seemed inadequate after what they'd shared. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten when they finally stirred. Reality crept back with the dawn. The camp would wake soon. Their absence would be noticed. But for these last moments, they held the night close. "I never thought," Clara began. "Nor I," Taza replied. "The heart chooses strange paths." They dressed slowly, reluctant to break the spell. Taza helped her adjust the dress, his fingers lingering on the beadwork. "You honor her memory," he said softly. "She would have called you daughter." Back at camp, they separated with careful casualness, but Clara felt the knowing looks of the women as she ducked into the wickiup. Her body still hummed with new awareness. Her lips still tasted of him. She lay on her buffalo robe, reliving each moment, until exhaustion finally claimed her. She woke to urgent voices. Taza was already up, reaching for his weapons. Outside, the camp buzzed with tense activity. Warriors painted themselves for battle. Women packed essential items. The scouts had returned with grave news. "Soldiers," Taza told her, his face grim. "2 days away, maybe less. We must move." Clara's blood chilled. She'd almost forgotten the outside world, the war between Apache and American, the reason she was here at all. "How many?" "Many. Too many to fight. We run to the canyon lands, where they cannot follow with horses." As the camp prepared to move, Clara found herself swept into the organized chaos. She helped Pale Moon pack, assisted with the children, did whatever was needed. Little Bird clung to her hand. Sensing the adults' fear, they moved out before noon, a long line snaking through the desert. The elderly and children rode. Everyone else walked. Clara marched with the women, her feet remembering the rhythm from that first terrible journey. But now she moved willingly, part of the band rather than its captive. Taza rode back and forth along the line, coordinating the exodus. Each time he passed Clara, their eyes met briefly. In those glances, she saw her own fear reflected, not of the soldiers, but of losing what they'd just found. They traveled through the night, stopping only to water the horses. By dawn, they'd reached the entrance to a maze of canyons, red rock walls rising like ancient fortifications. Here they would make their stand if the soldiers followed. As they set up a temporary camp, a young warrior rode in hard, his horse lathered with sweat. He spoke rapidly to the chief, gesturing back the way they'd come. Clara didn't need to understand the words to read the message. The soldiers were closer than expected. "We have 1 day," Taza told her. "Maybe less." That evening, as the band prepared defenses and planned escape routes deeper into the canyons, Taza came to Clara. "You could leave," he said without preamble. "When soldiers come, show yourself. They take you back to your people." Clara stared at him. "My people? After last night, you think I could just leave?" "I think of your safety," he said roughly. "This life, always running, always fighting, is no life for you." "And what life waits for me in Mercy's Bend?" Clara demanded. "To be the widow who lived with Apaches, to be whispered about, shunned, to pretend I never knew you." Taza pulled her against him, burying his face in her hair. "I am selfish," he admitted. "I want you to stay, but I fear for you. Then we face that fear together." Clara said firmly, "I made my choice by the stream. I choose you, choose this life, whatever comes." They made love that night with desperate passion, aware it might be their last chance. Every touch was precious, every kiss a promise. They spoke with their bodies what words couldn't capture. Love discovered too late, too impossible, too real to deny. Before dawn, Taza painted Clara's face with the protective symbols of his clan. "Now you are truly one of us," he said. "If we are separated, any Apache will know you belong to me. We'll protect you." "We won't be separated," Clara said fiercely. But even as she spoke, they could hear the sound of horses in the distance. Many horses. The soldiers had found them. Taza strapped a knife to Clara's waist, showed her how to use it. "If soldiers take you, do not fight. Live. That is all I ask. Live and remember." "Taza," he silenced her with a kiss, hard and brief. "My heart sees you," he said. in this life and the next. Then he was gone, joining the warriors preparing to buy the women and children time to escape deeper into the canyons. Clara wanted to run after him, to stand beside him, but Pale Moon grabbed her arm. "You come," the woman said in broken English. "He fights better knowing you safe." Clara allowed herself to be pulled along with the fleeing women and children, but her eyes stayed on Taza until the red rocks swallowed him from view. In the distance, the first shots rang out, echoing off the canyon walls like thunder. She pressed her hand to her belly, where she suspected new life had taken root by the stream, a child conceived in love rather than duty, in choosing rather than taking. Whatever came next, she would have that piece of him, that proof that their love had existed. The sound of battle grew closer. Clara clutched Little Bird's hand and ran deeper into the red rock maze, Taza's mother's dress whispering around her legs, his paint on her face marking her as Apache. She was no longer the grieving widow from Mercy's Bend. She was something new, someone forged in desert fire and moonlight streams. She was Taza's woman, and she would survive this day, as he'd asked. She would live and remember, and hope that somewhere in these ancient canyons, their paths would cross again. The war cries echoed off the stones, Apache and soldier alike. Clara ran on, her heart breaking and soaring at once, carrying their secret within her, proof that love could bloom even in the harshest ground. The attack came at dawn like thunder breaking over the canyon. Clara had barely slept, hidden with the women and children deep in a cave system. The Apache warriors had held the soldiers at the canyon entrance through the night, but now the full assault began. Gunfire echoed off the red rocks, punctuated by war cries and screams. Clara held Little Bird close, the child trembling against her. Around them, women clutched their children, some praying, others preparing weapons of their own, knives, clubs, anything to defend their young if the soldiers broke through. "Stay together," Pale Moon commanded. "If soldiers come, we go deeper into caves." But the soldiers had learned from previous battles. Instead of following the Apache into the canyon maze where their numbers meant nothing, they positioned sharpshooters on the rim. Rifle fire rained down from above, finding targets among the defending warriors. A young boy ran into the cave, blood streaming from his shoulder. "They break through!" he gasped. "Warriors, fall back!" Clara's heart seized. Taza was out there, fighting to give them time. She wanted to run to him, but Pale Moon's iron grip held her back. "You stay. Think of child you carry." How the woman knew. Clara couldn't guess. Perhaps it showed in her face. Or perhaps Pale Moon simply had the wisdom of women who'd seen much of life and death. The retreat turned into chaos. Warriors stumbled back, many wounded, trying to shield the fleeing women and children. Clara searched desperately for Taza among them, but couldn't find him in the dust and confusion. Then she saw him. He was carrying a wounded elder, blood running down his own arm from a bullet graze. Their eyes met across the battlefield. And in that instant, Clara saw his relief that she lived mixed with anguish at what was coming. "Move! Move!" The warriors urged them deeper into the canyons, but the soldiers pressed hard. They'd brought Apache scouts. Traitors, some said. Pragmatists, said others, who knew these hiding places. In the narrow confines of a side canyon, the two forces met in brutal close combat. Clara watched in horror as people she'd come to know fell under cavalry sabers and bullets. The neat formations she'd seen at military parades dissolved into savage individual struggles. Black Crow, the scarred warrior who'd captured her, went down fighting 3 soldiers at once, even as blood poured from multiple wounds. He managed to kill 2 before the third ran him through. His eyes found Clara in his last moments, and he nodded once, perhaps acknowledgement that she'd proven herself Apache after all. Little Bird was torn from Clara's arms when a soldier grabbed the child. Without thinking, Clara drew the knife Taza had given her and lunged. The blade found its mark under the soldier's arm, where his uniform coat gaped. He dropped Little Bird with a cry, and Clara scooped her up, running. But there was nowhere to run. The soldiers were everywhere, overwhelming the Apache through sheer numbers. Women and children fell alongside warriors. The massacre Samuel had once described to her in hushed, excited tones was happening before her eyes. But now she saw it from the other side, not glorious victory, but slaughter. "Little bird!" Pale Moon's scream cut through the battle noise. Clara turned to see a soldier's rifle aimed at the child in her arms. She spun, shielding Little Bird with her body, waiting for the bullet. The shot came, but not at her. The soldier crumpled, and Taza stood behind him, his rifle smoking. But the effort had cost him. Blood soaked his side where an earlier wound had reopened. "Clara!" He fought his way to her, cutting down another soldier who tried to stop him. "Take her! Go!" But it was too late. They were surrounded. Soldiers closed in from all sides, rifles raised. Clara clutched Little Bird tighter, feeling the child's heart racing against her chest. That's when she saw him. Captain Morrison, from Fort Buchanan. He'd been to Mercy's Bend several times, had even dined at her table when Samuel was alive. His eyes widened in recognition despite the Apache dress and face paint. "Mrs. Whitmore?" He stared in disbelief. "Clara Whitmore. Lower your weapons," he barked at his men. "That's a white woman." "No!" Clara shouted. "I'm not—" But rough hands were already pulling her away from Little Bird, who screamed and reached for her. Taza roared in fury, trying to get to them, but 3 soldiers tackled him, even wounded. It took 5 men to hold him down. He fought like a man possessed, calling Clara's name. "Animals," Morrison said with disgust, then turned to Clara with paternal concern. "Don't worry, Mrs. Whitmore. You're safe now. These savages will never hurt you again. You don't understand." Clara struggled against the soldiers holding her. "Let me go, Little Bird." She watched in horror as a soldier casually shot Pale Moon when she tried to reach her daughter. Little Bird's scream was soundless, her mouth open in mute agony as her mother fell. The child broke free and ran to the body, her twisted foot making her stumble. "No!" Clara fought harder. "She's just a child. Don't hurt her." Morrison frowned. "You're hysterical, ma'am. It's understandable after your ordeal." He nodded to his men. "Secure her. We'll get her back to civilization." They bound her hands, for her own safety, Morrison said, and forced her onto a horse. All around, the killing continued. Warriors who surrendered were shot. Women who fought back were cut down. Children. Clara closed her eyes, but that couldn't shut out the sounds. When she opened them again, she saw soldiers collecting scalps, laughing as they compared their trophies. The same men who'd called the Apache savages. "Taza!" She screamed his name as they led her away. Through the dust and chaos, she saw him still fighting his captors, his eyes wild as he watched her being taken. A soldier raised a rifle butt and brought it down on his head. Taza crumpled, and they bound him in chains. At least he lived. It was the only thought that kept Clara from complete despair as they rode away from the massacre. Behind them, smoke rose from burning bodies, the soldiers cleaning up, as Morrison termed it. They made camp that night 20 miles from the canyon. Clara was given a tent, clean clothes, food she couldn't eat. Morrison tried to be kind in his way, asking gentle questions about her ordeal. "How long were you captive, Mrs. Whitmore? Did they harm you?" Clara stared at him with dead eyes. "I wasn't a captive," she said quietly. "Not anymore." Morrison's face hardened. Stockholm Syndrome. He muttered, "It's not uncommon. Don't worry, ma'am. Once you're back among civilized people, you'll recover your senses." Through the tent walls, Clara could hear the soldiers celebrating their victory. They passed around whiskey, boasted of their kills. One young lieutenant vomited after looking at the collected scalps, earning mockery from the veterans. 37 by my count, someone said. Not bad for a morning's work. "Did you see that big buck with a scarred face? Fought like a demon." "The one the captain wants to hang? Yeah, he'll make a good example." Clara's blood froze. They were talking about Taza. She tried to leave the tent, but guards blocked her way. "Captain's orders, ma'am, for your protection." The next day's ride was torture. Clara was forced to ride side saddle in a borrowed dress, playing the rescued captive. Every mile took her farther from Taza, from the life she'd chosen. Her body ached with more than physical pain. Her heart felt torn from her chest. They reached Fort Buchanan by evening. Word had already spread about the rescued white woman. Wives of officers came to gawk at her, offering sympathy and tea and horrified fascination. "You poor dear," Colonel's wife Patterson cooed, "living among those beasts. However, did you survive?" "They're not beasts," Clara said flatly. "They're people. They have families, children." The ordeal has affected her mind, Morrison explained apologetically. "It's quite common, I'm told." They locked her in quarters, comfortable quarters, but locked nonetheless. Through her window, she could see the stockade where Apache prisoners were held. She pressed against the glass, searching for any sign of Taza among the figures in chains. That night, she heard screaming from the stockade. Interrogations, Morrison called them when she demanded answers the next day. Gathering intelligence necessary for the safety of settlers. "I want to see him," Clara said. "The warrior called Taza. I need to see him." Morrison's expression grew stern. "That animal is scheduled to hang tomorrow. Mrs. Whitmore. A lesson to others who would take white women. I suggest you prepare yourself to testify about your treatment. Your words could save other women from such fate." Clara felt the world tilt. "Hang? You can't. He protected me. He protected you." Morrison laughed bitterly. "Is that what he told you? Mrs. Whitmore. That savage was responsible for the deaths of 12 settlers last year alone. Whatever lies he fed you, whatever methods he used to ensure your cooperation, I assure you, he deserves his fate." That night, Clara lay in her comfortable bed, hand pressed to her still flat belly. Outside, she could hear the soldiers building gallows. Each hammer blow felt like it was nailing shut her heart. She had to save him. Somehow, she had to make them understand. But looking at her reflection, clean, dressed in widow's weeds again, the painted symbols washed from her face, she wondered who would believe her. She looked like what they expected. A victim. Not a woman who'd chosen love over civilization, who'd found more humanity among the savages than she'd ever known in Mercy's Bend. Tomorrow they would try to hang the man she loved, the man whose child she carried. The man who'd shown her that home wasn't walls and respectability, but the space between two hearts that recognized each other. Clara rose and went to the window, pressing her palm against the cold glass. Somewhere in the darkness, Taza was spending what might be his last night on earth. She whispered the words he'd taught her, the Apache declaration of love. "My heart sees you," she breathed into the night, in this life and the next. Tomorrow, she would fight for him with the only weapons left to her, words and the truth. It might not be enough, but she had to try. She owed him that much. She owed their unborn child a chance to know its father. And she owed herself the chance to prove that what they'd shared was real, was worth saving, was worth the world calling her mad. The stars outside seemed cold and distant, nothing like the warm lights that had watched over their love by the stream. But they were the same stars, and under them, she made her vow. She would save him, or die trying. The interrogation room at Fort Buchanan was sparse. A wooden table, 2 chairs, and walls that seemed to press in with judgment. Clara sat rigidly as Captain Morrison and Colonel Patterson questioned her, their voices alternating between paternal concern and military efficiency. "Mrs. Whitmore," the colonel began. "We need to understand exactly what happened during your captivity. Every detail could help us prevent future tragedies." "I've told you," Clara said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I wasn't mistreated." "The Apache, Stockholm Syndrome," Morrison interrupted, speaking to the colonel. "Classic case. They break the captive's will through isolation and fear, then show small kindnesses. The victim begins to sympathize with their captors." "I am not a victim." Clara slammed her hand on the table. "And I'm not mad. That man you plan to hang saved my life more than once." The colonel's eyes narrowed. "Which man? The savage called Taza?" "Don't call him that." Clara's voice dropped dangerously low. His name is Taza Redhawk. He lost his family to soldiers who attacked a peaceful camp. His mother and 12-year-old sister were murdered, their heads taken as trophies. Apache propaganda. Morrison dismissed. They all claim to be victims. I want to see the trial records. Clara demanded. The evidence against him. The two men exchanged glances. There will be no trial, Mrs. Whitmore. The colonel said, This is a military matter. The savage was caught bearing arms against the United States Army, while defending women and children. Clara stood, her chair scraping back. I was there. Your soldiers shot children. Colonel, little girls no older than 7 or 8. Enough. The colonel's fist hit the table. Mrs. Whitmore, you're clearly disturbed by your ordeal. I'm ordering you confined to quarters under medical supervision until you recover your senses. You can't. I can, and I will. His voice was iron. Guards! As soldiers entered to escort her out. Clara made one last desperate play. I demand to speak with a lawyer. I'm a citizen, not a prisoner. The colonel smiled coldly. Of course you're not a prisoner. Mrs. Whitmore, you're a patient, recovering from severe trauma. No lawyer necessary. They locked her in the fort's medical wing, where the doctor, a nervous young man named Hartley, prescribed laudanum for her hysteria. Clara refused it, needing her wits clear. Through her barred window, she could see the gallows taking shape in the courtyard. That evening, an unexpected visitor arrived. Reverend Josiah Mills, an elderly minister who'd known Samuel, entered her room with sad eyes. Clara, he said gently, I heard about your situation. Reverend? Clara grasped his hands. You have to help me. They're going to hang an innocent man. The old man's face was troubled. I've spoken with the colonel. He says you've been affected by your captivity. I'm not mad. Clara pulled back, frustrated. Reverend, you knew Samuel. You know I'm not given to flights of fancy. Then help me understand, he said, sitting heavily. The colonel says you claim to care for this Apache warrior, that you defend the very people who kidnapped you. Clara took a deep breath. Here was her chance, perhaps her only chance. Reverend, what does the Bible say about judging others? About mercy? She told him everything. The capture, yes, but also Taza's protection. Little Bird's snake bite, the storm cave, the way the Apache had gradually accepted her. She spoke of their humanity, their love for their children, their grief for their dead. And Taza? The Reverend asked quietly. Clara's voice softened. He showed me kindness when he had every reason for cruelty. He shared his mother's memory, her dress. She stopped, choosing her words carefully. He treated me with more respect than my own husband often did. The Reverend was silent for a long moment. You speak as a woman in love, he said finally. Is that madness? Clara challenged. To see humanity where others see only enemies? To find love where there should be hate? The colonel will never accept it, Mills said, but he stood, resolve firming his weathered features. There's someone who might help. Judge Hamilton is in Tucson for the circuit court. He and I correspond regularly. He has progressive views on the treatment of natives. Can you reach him in time? I'll ride through the night if necessary. He squeezed her shoulder. Have faith, child. God works in mysterious ways. After he left, Clara paced her small room like a caged animal. Outside, soldiers tested the gallows trap door. Each thud echoed through her bones. Near midnight, Dr. Hartley returned, insisting she take laudanum to sleep, when Clara refused again. He had orderlies hold her while he administered it by force. The drug pulled her under into restless dreams where Taza called her name across an impossible distance. She woke to commotion, shouting in the courtyard, horses arriving, struggling against the laudanum's lingering effects. Clara stumbled to the window. A distinguished man in a black suit was arguing with Colonel Patterson. Behind him, Reverend Mills looked exhausted but determined. Clara's heart leaped. The judge had come. An hour later, Guards brought her to the colonel's office. Judge Hamilton, a stern man with penetrating gray eyes, sat behind the desk. The colonel stood to one side, face thunderous. "Mrs. Whitmore," the judge began, "Reverend Mills has made some extraordinary claims about your situation. I need to hear your testimony directly." This time, Clara held nothing back. She spoke of the raid that killed civilians, including Little Bird's mother. She described the soldiers collecting scalps, shooting surrendering warriors. She named specific soldiers she'd recognized, gave details that could be verified. "And this warrior, Taza," the judge asked. "He's not what they claim," Clara said firmly. "Yes, he's fought soldiers, but only after watching his family slaughtered. If someone killed your family, Your Honor, wouldn't you fight back?" "That's different," the colonel began. "Is it?" Clara turned on him. "Because they're Apache, their grief matters less? Their children deserve death." "Mrs. Whitmore," the judge interrupted, "the Reverend suggests you have personal feelings for this warrior." Clara lifted her chin. "I carry his child." The statement exploded through the room like a bombshell. The colonel cursed. Morrison looked disgusted, but the judge merely raised an eyebrow. "You're certain?" "Yes." Clara placed a protective hand over her stomach. "A child conceived not through force or captivity, but through love. I chose him, Your Honor, as he chose me." "This is obscene," the colonel erupted. "She's clearly been ruined in mind and body. No decent white woman would—" "Would what?" Clara interrupted. "Would see humanity in those you call savage? Would find more honor in an Apache warrior than in soldiers who murder children?" The judge raised a hand for silence. "I need to interview the prisoner." They brought Taza in chains so heavy he could barely walk. His face was battered, one eye swollen shut, but when he saw Clara, his expression transformed. "Clara," he breathed. She started toward him, but guards blocked her way. "I'm here," she called in Apache, the few words she'd learned. "I'm fighting for you." The judge questioned Taza through an interpreter, one of the Apache scouts. Taza answered with dignity despite his chains, admitting to fighting soldiers but denying attacks on civilians. "Ask him about Mrs. Whitmore," the judge instructed. Taza's voice grew soft. "She is my heart," he said in English, looking directly at Clara. "I would die before harming her. The Apache are skilled liars." Morrison began. "As are soldiers, apparently." The judge cut him off. "Mrs. Whitmore's testimony raises serious questions about the conduct of this raid. I'm ordering a full investigation." "You can't." The colonel stepped forward. "This is a military matter." "And I'm a federal judge," Hamilton replied coolly. "Unless you'd like me to wire Washington about potential war crimes against civilians." The colonel backed down, but his eyes promised retribution. The judge turned to Clara. "The prisoner cannot be released without trial. However, given the questions raised, I'm postponing the execution pending investigation. He'll be transferred to civilian custody in Tucson." It wasn't freedom, but it was life. Clara sagged with relief. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "Mrs. Whitmore is a free citizen. She may go where she pleases." "I'll go to Tucson," Clara said immediately. "I'll testify at the trial." As they led Taza away, he managed to turn back. "Name the child Ayana if a girl," he called. "It means eternal blossom. For boy, Dakota, friend to everyone. You'll name the child yourself." Clara called back. "I swear it. The trial would be long and difficult." The prejudice against Apache ran deep, and many would call Clara a traitor to her race. But she'd won this first battle. Taza would live to see another day, perhaps many days. As she left Fort Buchanan, Clara touched her belly where new life grew. She'd lost her home, her reputation, her place in white society. But she'd gained something more valuable, the knowledge that love could bloom in the harshest ground, that humanity existed in those society called inhuman, that sometimes being saved meant choosing to see with the heart rather than the eyes. The road to Tucson stretched long before her. But Clara walked it with purpose. She had a man to save, a child to protect, and a truth to tell that might, just might, change a few minds about who the real savages were in this violent land. Behind her, Fort Buchanan faded into dust and distance. Ahead lay an uncertain future, but for the first time since Samuel's death, Clara felt truly alive. She was no longer the grieving widow of Mercy's Bend. She was Clara Whitmore, lover of an Apache warrior, mother of a child who had bridged two worlds, and a woman who'd learned that sometimes the greatest courage was simply choosing to see clearly when everyone else was blind. The Tucson jail was a fortress of adobe and iron, baking under the desert sun. Clara stood outside its gates, her hand pressed against the rough wall as if she could somehow reach Taza through stone and mortar. 6 months had passed since the trial that saved him from the gallows but condemned him to exile transportation to a reservation in distant Wyoming, a place so foreign to the desert Apache it might as well have been the moon. "You can't keep coming here," Marshal Bennett said, not unkindly. He'd grown used to Clara's daily visits, her stubborn refusal to accept the inevitable. "Transport wagon leaves tomorrow at dawn. Orders are final." Clara turned away to hide her tears. Tomorrow, after tomorrow, she'd never see Taza again. The authorities had made that abundantly clear. No visitors would be allowed at the Wyoming reservation, especially not a white woman who'd testified on behalf of Apache hostiles. That evening, she sat in her small rented room above the general store, counting the coins she'd saved from taking in washing and mending. It wasn't much, but it might be enough for stage fare to Wyoming. The thought of following Taza had consumed her for weeks, but practical reality kept intruding. She was 7 months pregnant, barely surviving on charity and odd jobs. What life could she offer a child in a place where she'd be even more of an outcast than here? A soft knock interrupted her desperate calculations. Mrs. Chen, the Chinese laundress, who'd been her only friend in Tucson, entered with a bowl of soup. "You must eat," the older woman said firmly. "Baby needs strength." Clara accepted the soup gratefully. Mrs. Chen understood being an outsider, married to a railroad worker, shunned by both white and Mexican society. She'd never questioned Clara's choices, only offered quiet support. "They're taking him tomorrow," Clara whispered. Mrs. Chen squeezed her shoulder. "Then tonight you pray. Tomorrow, new path reveals itself. Always does." That night, Clara barely slept. She rose before dawn, dressing carefully in her best dress, the black one from her widowhood. Properly respectable. If this was goodbye, she'd face it with dignity. The transport wagon sat in the jail courtyard, iron bars making it a cage on wheels. A dozen Apache prisoners were already loaded, chains clanking as they shifted on hard benches. Clara's heart broke seeing proud warriors reduced to cargo. Then she saw him. Taza emerged from the jail, his head high despite the heavy shackles. Prison had thinned him, but his spirit remained unbroken. His eyes found hers across the courtyard, and for a moment, the world stopped. 5 minutes, Marshal Bennett said quietly. "That's all I can give you." Clara approached the wagon, reaching through the bars to touch Taza's face. He leaned into her palm, eyes closing. "My heart sees you," she whispered in Apache. "Always," he replied. Then, urgently, "Clara, you must live. Find happiness. Don't waste your life grieving what cannot be." "How can I be happy without you? You carry our child," he said, managing to touch her swollen belly through the bars. "In this child. I live in this child. We continue. Promise me, raise the baby strong, free. Tell stories of both peoples. Make the child a bridge. I promise." Clara choked out. The driver climbed aboard, gathering the reins. Time was running out. "I have something," Taza said quickly. He'd managed to keep one thing hidden through months of imprisonment, a small leather pouch on a cord around his neck. Guards had dismissed it as a worthless charm. Now he pulled it over his head, pressing it into Clara's hands. "For the child, so they know their father." Inside was a perfectly round turquoise stone, smooth from generations of handling. Taza's grandmother's, he'd once told her, passed down through the women of his family. But this should go to my child's mother. Taza finished firmly. You are my family now. The wagon lurched forward. Clara walked alongside as long as she could, their fingers intertwined through the bars until the last possible moment. Then he was gone, dust swirling in the wagon's wake, taking half her heart with him. Clara stood in the empty courtyard until the sun climbed high, the turquoise stone clutched in her fist. Fine nearly. Mrs. Chen appeared, gently leading her away. Come, she said. Baby needs you strong. The months that followed blurred together in a haze of survival. Clara took any work she could find, washing, sewing, even helping the local midwife with deliveries. Her pregnancy advanced, making physical labor harder, but she persevered. The baby needed to eat. The townspeople treated her with a mixture of pity and disgust. The Apache woman, they called her, though never to her face. Mothers pulled their children away when she passed. The church ladies whispered about her shame, carrying a savage's child, defending those who'd murdered good Christian settlers. Only a few showed kindness. Mrs. Chen remained steadfast. The midwife, a Mexican woman named Rosa who'd seen too much of life to judge, prepared her for the birth, and, surprisingly, Reverend Mills, who'd relocated to Tucson after the Fort controversy, offered quiet support. God's love extends to all his children, he said simply when asked why he helped her. Apache, white, or mixed, all are precious in his sight. Clara went into labor during a February dust storm. The wind howled like a living thing, rattling windows and doors. Rosa and Mrs. Chen attended her through 18 hours of agony. Clara clutched the turquoise stone, drawing strength from its smooth surface. Imagining Taza's hands holding hers, the baby came with the dawn. A boy, healthy and strong, with his father's dark eyes and his mother's stubborn chin. Clara wept as she held him, seeing Taza in every feature. Dakota, she whispered, remembering Taza's words, friend to everyone. But she called him Samuel Dakota Whitmore on the birth certificate, giving him his legal father's name for protection. In private, he was just Dakota. Her little miracle. Life with an infant proved even harder than pregnancy. Clara's milk came in poorly, weakened by months of poor nutrition. Dakota cried constantly, sensing perhaps the sadness that permeated their small room. Clara walked the floors at night, singing half-remembered Apache lullabies Taza had hummed, mixing them with hymns from her childhood. The townspeople's hostility increased with Dakota's birth. His mixed heritage was obvious, skin darker than Clara's but lighter than full Apache, features that marked him as between worlds. Children threw stones. Adults muttered about half-breed abominations. One particularly bad day, when Dakota was 3 months old, Clara found an eviction notice on her door. The landlord had received complaints about renting to her. She had 1 week to leave. That night, despair nearly won. Clara sat with Dakota at her breast, counting her few remaining coins. Not enough for stage fare anywhere, barely enough for food. She thought of the orphanage at the edge of town, where unwanted children disappeared behind high walls. Would Dakota be better off there? At least he'd eat regularly. No, she said aloud, startling the baby. We survive together or not at all. The next morning brought unexpected salvation. Rosa, the midwife, appeared with a proposition. My cousin in Benson needs help. She runs a boarding house near the railroad. Rough men, but they pay. She needs someone to cook, clean, help with accounts. Room and board included. It wasn't ideal. Benson had a reputation as a wild railroad town. But it was away from Tucson's judgment, and it included shelter. She know about... Clara gestured to Dakota. I told her you're a widow with a baby. Nothing more needed. Clara packed their few belongings that afternoon. As she prepared to leave the room that had been their refuge, she found a package by the door. Inside was a beautiful cradle board, Apache style, with intricate beadwork. No note, but Clara recognized Mrs. Chen's hidden kindness. The stage to Benson rattled through desert scrubland. Dakota secure in his new cradle board. Clara watched Tucson disappear, thinking of another departure, another journey into the unknown. But this time, she wasn't a captive. She was a mother, protecting her child, building a future from ashes. Dakota fussed, and Clara adjusted his wrappings, humming softly. The turquoise stone hung around her neck now, warm against her skin. Somewhere in Wyoming. Taza lived under gray skies, far from desert sun, but here in her arms, part of him remained. "Your father wanted you to be a bridge," she whispered to the baby. "Between two peoples, two worlds. I don't know how to do that, little one, but we'll learn together." The stage rolled on through gathering dusk. Behind them lay judgment and sorrow. Ahead waited uncertainty, hard work, the challenge of raising a mixed-blood child in a world that wanted clear lines between us and them. But Clara had survived captivity, found love where it shouldn't exist, faced down the U.S. Army, and birthed a child alone. She could survive whatever came next. The stars emerged in the darkening sky, the same stars that had watched over a moonlit stream where two broken people found wholeness in each other. Clara touched the turquoise stone and made a silent promise. "We will survive, my love. Your son will grow strong and free, and someday, somehow, we will be together again, in this life or the next." Dakota settled into sleep. His small fist curled around her finger. The future stretched uncertain before them. But for now, this was enough. Mother and child, carrying love forward into tomorrow. Proof that even in the harshest ground, hope could take root and grow. 5 years had passed like seasons in the desert, sometimes harsh, sometimes surprisingly gentle. Clara stood in the doorway of her small house on the outskirts of Benson, watching Dakota play with the wooden horses she'd carved for him. At 5, he was tall for his age, with his father's graceful movements and his mother's determined spirit. The morning sun caught the silver threads in Clara's hair, premature, perhaps, but earned through survival. The boarding house job had lasted 2 years before Clara saved enough to open her own small school. Teaching the children of railroad workers and Mexican farmers wasn't lucrative, but it provided enough to rent this little adobe house with its garden plot. "Mama, look," Dakota called, making his horses race across the dusty yard. "This one's faster." "That's wonderful. Mijo," Clara replied, using the Spanish endearment she'd learned from her Mexican neighbors. Here in Benson, among other outcasts and immigrants, they'd found an uneasy peace. The sound of hoofbeats made her look up. A lone rider approached, silhouetted against the morning light. Something about the way he sat his horse, the set of his shoulders. Clara's heart stopped. The rider drew closer, and time seemed to fracture. It was him, older, scarred. His hair now touched with gray like hers, but unmistakably Taza. He dismounted slowly, as if afraid sudden movement might shatter this moment. "Clara," he said, and his voice was exactly as she remembered, deep and gentle, carrying the weight of years and distance. She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. 5 years of dreams, of imagined reunions, and now he stood before her in worn civilian clothes, no longer a warrior, but still every inch the man she loved. "Papa!" Dakota's small voice broke the spell. He'd come to stand beside Clara, studying the stranger with eyes exactly like Taza's own. Taza's face transformed as he looked at his son. Wonder, joy, and pain flickered across his features. He dropped to one knee, bringing himself to Dakota's level. "Yes," he said softly, "I am your papa." Dakota looked to Clara for confirmation. At her nod, he stepped forward with a child's fearless curiosity. "Mama said you had to go far away, to Wyoming." "I did," Taza replied. "But I came back. I promised your mama I would find you again." "How?" Clara finally found her voice. "The reservation. They said no one could leave." Taza stood, his eyes never leaving her face. "The reservation agent died 2 months ago. A new one came, younger man with different ideas. He saw I could read, write, speak English, made me translator, teacher for the children. When government inspectors came, I helped them. They were Impressed. Gave me papers. He pulled a worn document from his pocket. Free to travel, to work, free to find my family. Clara's knees gave out. Taza caught her, pulled her against him, and she breathed in his scent, leather and sage and home. His arms around her felt like coming alive after 5 years of merely surviving. Is Mama sick? Dakota asked, worried. No, mijo. Clara laughed through her tears. Mama is happy, so very happy. They went inside. Dakota chattering excitedly about showing his papa everything, his toys, his books, the garden where he helped grow corn and beans. Taza listened with infinite patience, but his eyes kept returning to Clara. When Dakota finally ran outside to gather his treasures, they had a moment alone. Taza traced the lines on Clara's face, the early gray in her hair. I'm not the same, she said quietly. 5 years. You are beautiful. He interrupted. More beautiful. Because I see our son in your eyes. I see the strength it took to survive alone. We weren't alone. Clara said, I felt you with us every day. And this, she pulled out the turquoise stone, still worn around her neck. This kept you close. Taza's hand covered hers over the stone. In Wyoming, I marked the days, 1,826 sunrises without you, each one. I promised myself, survive another day, find way back. And you did. The journey was long. Many told me I was fool, that you would have new husband, new life, that no white woman would wait for Apache man. Then they don't know me very well, Clara said fiercely. Dakota burst back in, arms full of treasures to share. The day passed in a blur of revelation. Taza told stories of Wyoming, the strange cold land, the other tribes forced to share space, the slow work of building understanding with government men. Clara shared their life in Benson, the struggles, the small victories, the way Dakota had grown strong despite the challenges of being between worlds. As evening fell, reality intruded. Clara prepared dinner, simple beans and tortillas. All she had, while questions hung unspoken in the air. What now? How could they be together in a world that still saw their love as abomination? I have plan, Taza said as they ate. In Wyoming, I met man named Carlisle. He runs school for Indian children in Pennsylvania. He wants teachers who understand both worlds. The pay is small, but includes housing, food, safe place for... He gestured to encompass their small family. Pennsylvania, Clara repeated. So far from home. Where is home? Taza asked gently. Is it place, or is it this? He reached across the table, taking her hand. That night, after Dakota fell asleep between them, refusing to let his papa out of sight, Clara and Taza lay awake, talking. They spoke of practical things, the journey east, selling her few possessions, the challenges ahead. But beneath the words ran a deeper current of joy, of disbelief that they were together again. I have something for you, Taza said. He produced a small leather bag, spilling its contents onto the blanket. A narrow gold band caught the lamplight. Simple, unadorned, but polished to a soft glow. Where did you... Traded 3 horses for it, he said. Good horses, but I wanted to do this proper way. Your way. He took her left hand, sliding the ring onto her finger where Samuel's ring had once sat. In eyes of your people, make you my wife. In eyes of my people, you already are. But this way, no one questions. You are Mrs. Taza Redhawk, married proper. Clara couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. The ring was slightly too large, would need adjustment, but it was perfect. It was promise made tangible. Hope given form. Yes, she whispered. Yes to all of it. To Pennsylvania. To the unknown. To whatever comes. As long as we're together. They were married 3 days later by a traveling preacher who asked no questions about Taza's heritage, caring only for the dollar they paid him. Mrs. Chen, who traveled from Tucson to visit, stood as witness, beaming through tears. The journey east took 2 weeks by train, a wonder that amazed Dakota, who pressed his nose to the window watching the world flash by. They traveled as a family, enduring stares and whispers, but also finding unexpected kindness from fellow travelers who saw only a small boy's excitement and his parents' obvious love. Pennsylvania was green in ways the desert never was. The Carlisle School sat on manicured grounds, imposing and institutional. But their small cottage on the edge of campus was cozy, with 2 bedrooms and a kitchen garden plot. "It's not the desert," Clara said their first night, listening to rain on the roof instead of coyote songs. "No," Taza agreed. "But you are here. Dakota is here. That makes it home." They built a life there. Taza taught Apache boys their letters and numbers while keeping their language alive in secret lessons. Clara worked with the younger children, easing their homesickness, teaching them that they could walk in both worlds without losing themselves. Dakota grew strong and bright. Learning from both parents, he spoke Apache and English with equal fluency, knew his father's stories and his mother's hymns. He was what Taza had envisioned, a bridge between worlds, proof that love could create understanding. Some nights, Clara stood at their window watching Taza work with the boys in the garden, teaching them desert plants that struggled in Pennsylvania soil but survived through careful tending. Like their love, she thought, transplanted, challenged, but ultimately thriving. The turquoise stone now hung around Dakota's neck, waiting to be passed on. The cycle continued, love enduring across all barriers, creating hope where none should exist. "Mama," Dakota said one evening, looking up from his schoolwork, "why do some people say Papa and you shouldn't be together?" Clara considered her answer carefully. "Because sometimes, mijo, people are afraid of what they don't understand. They see differences where we see love, but love is always stronger than fear. Always." Taza entered then, shaking rain from his coat, and Dakota ran to him as he did every evening, as if each reunion was precious, learned perhaps from those years of absence. Watching them together, Clara touched her wedding ring, properly sized now, worn smooth from daily wear. They'd lost so much time, faced such hardship, but they'd found each other again, against all odds, across all distance. Love had been their rebellion, their resistance, their redemption. In a world that demanded they be enemies, they'd chosen each other. And in that choosing, they'd created something new, a family that belonged fully to neither world but was treasured in both. The desert lived in their memories, moonlight on water, promises whispered in English and Apache. But home, they'd learned, wasn't a place. It was this, 3 hearts beating as one, proof that love could bloom in any ground, no matter how hostile, no matter how far from its roots. They were together. After everything, they were together. And it was enough. It was everything. Thank you for listening to this tale from the Wild West. If you enjoyed Clara and Taza's story, I'd love to hear where you're listening from. Leave a comment below and let's connect across the miles, just as our lovers connected across their divided worlds. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more stories of love, courage, and survival from the American frontier. Share your thoughts about Clara and Taza's journey. Did their love touch your heart as it touched mine? Until we meet again around the campfire, partners, keep riding toward the sunset and believing in love's power to bridge any divide.